Hello and welcome everyone to another Facebook Live with none other than Prof. Noakes. Prof, thank you so much for being here with us today again. We really appreciate all the time and effort you take every month to come here and to answer all the questions from our audience members. If this is the first time that you are joining one of our lives, this is a wonderful opportunity for you to come and ask Prof any nutrition, health, or performance related questions. You can just pop your question in the comment box. And also remember to let us know where you are tuning in from. It's always lovely to hear from you. Prof and I are tuning in from quite a windy Cape Town today, but we are very excited to have this session with you. Before we start, I just quickly want to announce that the Nutrition Network's Addiction Bundle has launched just yesterday. So make sure you head on over that way to go see what that all entails. And then, if you do not know yet, there is big news on the horizon for the Noakes Foundation. We are so happy to say that we will be having our World Nutrition Summit in October this year. You will have the opportunity to come to Cape Town and to meet Prof. Noakes in person. And I know he's very excited to meet everyone. So make sure you get your ticket, but do not fret if you cannot make it to Cape Town. There's also the opportunity to attend the conference virtually. And we will put all of those links in the comment section of today's Facebook Live. And even if you have any questions related to the summit, you're also welcome to ask us. So, Prof, before we go on to the questions, there's a little something you want to share. What have you been up to the past week?
So, very exciting. About a week ago or so, I was given an award by my old school, which they give every so often to famous graduates of the school. And then you have to give a talk. And the talk is actually in the chapel, which is one of the most magnificent buildings in Cape Town, the Diocesan College Chapel. It's just an amazing building. It was built in memory of 144 old boys who died in the First World War. And it was built in the 1920s, and it's got this magnificent dome and this fantastic altar. And so I had to speak from the altar, which is quite demanding, as you can imagine, because you can't show any slides. So I didn't know what to do. So I had this one fantastic quote from a book by Jeff Hollister. And Jeff Hollister was one of the first employees of Nike in the 1960s. And he died about 10 years ago and wrote his autobiography. And he included this wonderful statement about how his life had been and what you have to do in life to be successful. So I've fashioned the whole talk around that segment. But how did I get there? I had to get there somehow. So couldn't just talk like that. So I realized something about the Nike phenomenon and how it influenced my life incredibly. So what I did was I took a couple of shoes, running shoes. And so here's the original marathon running shoe. This is what you ran in. And the reason you ran in this shoe was the technology was only available that they used a leather upper and a leather bottom, and it was patched together, either sewn or it was glued together. But that was the technology at the time. So in the late 1800s, 1890, if you're running the first Olympic marathon, that's what you ran in. But at the same time, there was another technology which had developed, which was the vulcanization of rubber. So this is a vulcanized sole. And at the same time, two companies, including Keds in the US and Converse, were able to take the vulcanized rubber and bind it to the canvas upper. And this became what in South Africa is called a tacky, but which overseas is called a sneaker. And why is it a sneaker? Because this makes a lot of noise when it runs, and this makes less noise. So this was a sneaker because you could sneak up on someone. So when I started running, this was the shoe that you would start running because there was nothing else available in South Africa not very much in America. And then Philip Knight who was a graduate of University of Oregon. He graduated and then he went to Stanford, did a graduate course in business science. And he came across this shoe, which is a Japanese shoe. And he was very impressed with it, made by Onitsuka. And this was a different, now they had some cushioning here, and they had a nylon upper. And the reason they had a nylon upper was because after the war, there were no more cows in Japan, and they couldn't source leather, so they had to make their own nylon. Anyway, he was so impressed with this shoe that he flew to Japan and met Mr. Onitsuka. And he said that he would like to import shoes into America to sell them in Oregon. And he had to borrow money. He sold his car and borrowed $1,000 from his father. And his father said, that's a crazy idea. And why was that? Because there were not enough runners in the whole of the United States to make a business of it. Anyway, he took the shoes in to America, and the turnover the first year was $8,000 worth of turnover. So it's a very small business. But eventually they got to making their own shoes. There's a whole story, a legal story about that. And Bill Bauman, who was the great coach of Oregon, developed the waffle sole. And there's a whole story of how he developed the waffle sole. So here, this was the shoe that really made it, because in this shoe, a lot of elite American runners were performing very well. And you see, what Philip Knight realized was that to get good runners, he had to help them. And that they helped them financially, which was, of course, against the law at the time, because all sport was amateur. And eventually, Knight and Nike did it so successfully that the runners became professional. And then the Olympic Games was forced to accept professional runners and other professional athletes. So that was what changed the world, was this shoe, Nike, and Phil Knight's developments. But what was also very important, that they didn't stop there. And then in 2016, this shoe was developed for Eliud Kipchoge. This was for him to break the marathon world record, which he did by running a 2:01 unaided. And so this was the advance from that. So that's how the shoes developed. But the main point of the story was that without this and this, I wouldn't have had a career. Why was that? Because the making athletics and sport professional meant there was a role for sports science to find out how to help athletes. And so my career started just at the moment that these shoes were being developed, particularly this one. And then I was well into my career by the time this shoe was developed. So that professionalized sport, and that made sports science a credible science. And it was something that was funded because athletes wanted to know how could you run faster, and countries wanted to know how could you help people run faster so that they could win more gold medals. So that's what I've been up to in the last two weeks. And I must tell you, I knew I had to give the lecture. It took me about 6 months to put the ideas together. And I didn't know whether it would work, but it worked brilliantly. And the boys really liked it, and there were a lot of positive feedback about it. So that's my story for this week, or this month.
Thank you, Prof. That's so interesting. I have a question about this.
Yes.
This shoe looks really interesting.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder, are there special rules and regulations around? That's
a great question.
Like how a shoe is allowed to look and what it's made of?
So there are many differences, but you can see that the size of this is much different than that. And they've now restricted this to 40 millimeters.
Is that less than what this is?
This is 40 millimeters.
That's a lot.
Yeah. So this is, I don't know, 10 or 15.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's the only rule, is 40 millimeters, because this makes a significant difference. In good athletes, they run about 2% faster. Sorry, the energy conservation is about 2%, which converts to a 1% improvement in performance. But not for everyone, interestingly. Some athletes do worse in these shoes. So that's interesting. But Puma has just come up with an even more advanced shoe, which they claim is even better than this one.
Oh, wow.
But sorry, one other point. If you look carefully there, you can see it. It's got an autograph on it. So that's the ultimate professionalization of running. And that's Eliud Kipchoge, probably the greatest marathon runner of all time.
Wow. Thank you for sharing, Prof. It is so interesting. I see we've got a few people in the comments saying hi. So Kieran is saying hi, greetings from a wet and windy west of Ireland. And then we've got great to be here. Wendy Moore saying from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. She's a regular, so thank you, Wendy. It's always lovely to see your name here on the screen. I really appreciate these live sessions, Prof and Jana, and I look forward to attending them every month. Thank you. We also enjoy them.
Yeah, we definitely do.
Then Glauce, another familiar name. Hello and welcome. Good morning all the way from Brazil. Eric van Wyk, good day, Prof and Jana from South Africa. And then I see here we already got some questions. Just quickly want to see if there's anyone else saying hi. So let's hop on to the first question from Glauce. I'm starting to work, so my question is, I've been on the diet since 2021, keeping in shape and my blood work is great. Thanks, Prof. But this year I've noticed that my HDL dropped a little, 68 milligrams per deciliter. Is there anything I can do to go back to 86 in 2024? Should I be worried? Thanks.
Well, you definitely shouldn't be worried. So I agree that it's dropped a little bit, but that could well be measurement error. So I think you should retest it again sometime in the future. But remember, what is the key is the triglyceride to HDL ratio. So you might have found that your triglycerides came down and that your ratio remains elevated. So that's what you want. You want to have that your ratio came down. That's what you want. You want a low triglyceride to HDL ratio. So I wouldn't be worried at all about the HDL. I would be looking to your glucose and your triglycerides and your insulin. And I'm sure that if you're sticking to the diet, they'll be fine. Yeah, I think we can't all be perfect. You can't get everything perfect. There's always going to be one marker that you would like to be better. And as long as you're doing the basics correctly, then you'll be fine.
Thank you, Prof. And thank you, Glauce, for that question. If I may ask a question tagged onto that, is Prof, maybe can you talk a little bit about the ratio that you mentioned and why that is important and why we calculate that? Why do we look at that specifically when it comes to cholesterol?
Okay, because so cholesterol itself is meaningless. It's just purely an association. And this is what people forget. It's only an association. But then it was grabbed by the cardiologists and the whole world because now they could find something to lower your total cholesterol, the statins, and they went with that one. And so if you speak to a cardiologist, they have only one thing, and that is cholesterol. They have no concept that anything else is important. But if you look at all the major studies, it's always diabetes that is the real problem. So diabetes is a risk factor for heart disease, for coronary heart disease. And it's insulin resistance underlying the diabetes. So that's what you've got to look at. You've got to look at your diabetes. And the key marker, and this was observed already in the 1960s, that it was triglycerides told you much more than your total cholesterol. And now we know that the triglyceride to HDL ratio is a good marker for your level of insulin resistance. As soon as you increase the carbs, the ratio gets worse. And as soon as you increase the fat intake, it gets better. And long term, it's one of the better predictors of your long-term risk of coronary artery disease. It's way better than cholesterol by itself. So I think that's what you should be worrying about. We should be worrying about the triglyceride HDL ratio. And no one will mention it to it because there's no drug that drops your triglycerides. And there's no drug that raises HDL. Or, in fact, there are, but they cause more problems for some reason. There was one drug that raised HDL cholesterol, and it caused more problems than it solved. So it was doing something else that wasn't good for you.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Prof. I see we've got a question here from Karen. Going back to the shoes. Does Prof have any comment on shoes like Hoka that are termed maximizing?
Thanks, Karen. Good morning to you. So, all the studies that have been done so far are on this shoe, on the Nike Vaporfly 4. That's the one that's been studied. And there's a one on Puma, the new Puma shoe. But the rest, they've kind of ignored. And Hoka, I know, because I run in Hoka, so I know that they haven't really been studied. So, you could check the literature, but I could not find any testing reported on Hoka, which may mean that either it hasn't been tested or it's been tested and hasn't been found to be successful. So Nike, obviously, they push their product and they make sure it gets studied. So this is the one. I don't know if Hoka includes all the features of this shoe. And the features are the very high heel, obviously. Then it's got a carbon fiber plate in it. And then it's got material that is very good at absorbing shock and returning it. And Puma claim that they've got even more shock returning or energy returning midsole than was present in this Nike shoe. And then it's incredibly light because it's very clear that adding a few grams to your feet makes you increase your oxygen consumption. So this shoe is probably lighter than this one, to give you an idea. When I feel it, this is an incredibly light shoe. So the material that they put into this shoe is extremely light. But I mean, I wouldn't like to train in this shoe because I think it would wear out very quickly. I think this is one you run 2 or 3 marathons in and then you bin it. But it's not a great training shoe. It's not built to last.
Thank you so much, Karen. It's so interesting. And I can confirm that shoe is incredibly light. So when I picked it up the first time, I was actually quite surprised.
Yeah.
I see Linda saying, hello, originally from Safflebury, Rhodesia, now in Ottawa, Canada. Thank you so much, Linda, for joining us. And then Louise Benning saying, hello, my friend, Best live on YouTube. Thank you.
You're always welcome, Louise. You can come back every day.
Always tuning in from the UK. I love learning new information from your talk. And I also want to mention, because I've met Louise a few years back at the PHE, the Public Health Collaboration in the UK, and Jane Bullen, our Advocacy and Strategy Lead, and the MD of Nutrition Network will be there this weekend. So if anyone is going to the PHC, please go say hi. I know we're going to have a stand there, and there's going to be a few competitions that you can enter to win some goodies from South Africa and some books signed by Prof. So go and have a look. Willem saying good afternoon. Are there any negatives during carnivore well? Thank you.
So Willem, I think that the main problems people say is constipation, and because you're not eating fiber, and some people think fiber is important, but it's for some reason a lot of people actually do better. They lose their constipation on this diet. So it's something that we don't really fully understand. I think the microbiome is terribly important, and the way in which the carnivore diet influences that is not really fully described. So I think that's the one complication. The other one is that you can have a very big increase in your LDL cholesterol concentration. And that's causing a lot of worry at the moment because there is a long-term study of people who are super responders. In other words, you get very high LDL cholesterol on going on the carnivore diet. And there is a study that has just been published, and there's a whole doubt because the claim is that the arterial disease progressed more rapidly in the carnivore people than in other studies. And there's something wrong, and I just don't know what it is. Because the people who did it are really good scientists, but they seem to have not quite got the story right, and it's being debated. So Dave Feldman is an entirely honest scientist, and he is reporting more on the findings, but it's not really finalized. And I think they started with people who are pretty healthy, and then a small change looks like a big change because people started with such good arteries. So we haven't got the full answer, but again, it can't be the diet, it can't be the cholesterol that's causing the problem. It may be something else in the lifestyle of people who choose to go carnivore diet. because it's not a randomized controlled trial. And remember, you cannot assume causation unless it's a randomized controlled trial. This was just an observational study with which they followed people over a couple of years. And those people will include many people doing different things. So they might all be eating the carnivore diet, but they're not all doing the same everything else. So then to say, oh, but it's the diet that caused the problem, you can't do that. But it's just convenient. And every cardiologist who's irritated by the carnivore diet has jumped on the bandwagon and saying, you see, I was right, you shouldn't be following the diet.
Thank you, Prof, and thank you, Willem, for that question. We've got a question from Kieran. Prof, do you think your recent marvelous work on the master regulator principle strengthens the case for low carb for strength athletes? In particular, I'm interested in competitive climbing and the benefits of low carb per se.
Yeah, Ciaran, I'm just so certain, again, I'm sorry, I shouldn't sound certain because that's not very scientific, but I don't understand how humans didn't evolve to eat a high carbohydrate diet. Our genes are designed to eat high fat diet. And the high carbohydrate diet causes chronic inflammation. I've got very little doubt about that. And, we've got things happening at the moment and observing athletes, and they do better than or whatever the sport is. They do better because I think they recover better if you're eating a really good diet with lots of real food. The problem with high carb diets is there's so much junk in the diet, or it can be so much junk in the diet. I've seen people reporting the Tour de France cyclist diets, and they are atrocious because these guys are performing well, or they think they're performing well. We don't know if they could do better doing something else. So I just think that the evidence is stacking up that for all sports where you're repeating the activity every day and you're training hard and you're competing regularly, I don't see any evidence that a low carb diet is producing detrimental effects. I just see benefits. The old argument is that you can't burn fat when you're doing high intensity exercise. We've disproved it. And if people don't accept it, that's fine, but that doesn't make it wrong. To remind you, we show the highest rates of fat oxidation in people exercising at 85% VO2 max. Now, very few athletes ever get to 85% VO2 max. And we just show that we made a calculation that a 52 kilogram athlete could run a sub 2-hour marathon just on fat. That's what the data show. And so therefore, that takes all those activities up to the marathon. You can do any of them on a high fat diet, and your climbing activities are not going to be quite as strenuous as that, but you'll get all the benefits that you don't run out of carbohydrates. I don't know how people cope in a long event with eating all those carbs. I mean, there's one guy claiming that in the Western States 100 miler, he takes 120 grams per hour, but I don't know how you do that. Because where's he getting it from? Who's helping him along the way? And what happens if you miss a few of your feeding stations? So these are questions. I mean, the one guy claims that in his Ironman, he now takes 200 grams an hour. I mean, it's atrocious. I don't know. In medicine, we give 75 grams to test whether you're healthy or not to prove that you're not as something to make you healthy. The glucose tolerance test of 75 grams is there to decide, can you manage that carbohydrate? Because we want to see if you can't, you will have prediabetes. And yet these people are doing 200 grams an hour. It's absolutely nonsensical.
Sure. Thank you, Prof, for that, and thank you for your question. The next question is also carnivore related, and it's from Wendy. She's saying a couple of quick questions. What are your thoughts about having coffee on an otherwise strict carnivore diet? Too many toxins or anti-nutrients? As a carnivore, is eating grain-fed, so that's the first question, and then as a carnivore, is eating grain-fed animals that are monogastric, i.e. chicken or pork, an issue, versus more nutrient-dense ruminant animals and wild fish?
Wendy, that's a great question, because I think that if you go into the literature, it's very clear that you're correct, that you're better off not eating grain-fed animals. Because the problem is that the omega-6 to omega-3 ratios in the fat, because both are essential fats, omega-3 and omega-6s, but our diet has changed dramatically in the last 100 years. We've gone from an omega-3 dominant diet to an omega-6 dominant diet. And the problem is the omega-6s are quite difficult to get if you are a carnivore, because some of the sites where you can get is beans. So if you're not eating beans and fish, it's quite difficult to get a decent omega-3 intake. So you're quite correct that you need to eat ruminant animals that are eating grass or whatever they're meant to eat, not grain-fed. And fish is a very important source of omega-6s. But then, you know, salmon is considered to be such an important source of omega-6, but a lot of it, sorry, omega-3, but a lot of it is farmed, and they're not eating plankton. And plankton is what generates the omega-3. So if you've got farm-fed fish, that's going to be full of omega-6s or have less omega-3s in it. So I think that this is an area that we have to take seriously. And the problem with meat is that it's the most nutrient dense of all the food. So you get that benefit, but then you're getting too much omega-6s, maybe if it's grain-fed. So you have to balance that up. And it's difficult, but you're quite correct that fish is the one key. And there are some vegetables that are higher in omega-3s. I think flaxseed and some other oils.
And your thoughts on the coffee?
Oh, I wouldn't worry about coffee. No. You know, every study I look at, it says coffee is helpful. And I don't think those are just funded by industry. I think if coffee was a problem, it would have been identified. In contrast, the evidence seems to suggest that it's quite healthy for you. And it may have some role in slightly diminishing risk of certain diseases.
Thank you, Prof. And thank you, Wendy, for those questions. Question from Eric. As someone who is office bound and with a firstborn on the way, time is and will be limited. I'm planning on getting in a few short walks during the day, tea time and lunch. How can I maximize results during these short stints? Spending an hour or more per session will unfortunately not be possible for now.
Yeah, I think, Eric, you should just do what is comfortable and do it. And obviously, we would argue that maybe you just need a bit more physical exercise. So some days you might do it a bit more intensively, but I think you need to just follow what your body tells you. The fact that you're getting out and doing something is already a good idea, and breaking the sitting pattern, because a lot of people say sitting is the new smoking. So I'm not sure about that, but you know, you're still young and you've got children, and once they're a bit more independent, you'll be able to go back to your conventional exercise. So I think that you're walking, and you might like to do more standing and standing at your desk and having a standing desk. That might help you a bit. But I wouldn't be too worried. There's no question that your diet's most important. That if you keep your diet good at this stage, you can cope with a little bit less exercise.
Thank you, Prof. And thank you, Eric, for that question. I see Craig is saying hi, and thank you to all for what you do. Christina is saying, oh, no, I think let's just skip those ones. Oh, I think we've got a troll in the comments. I'm not quite sure. Maybe our media team can just have a look there. Good afternoon, dear Tim. I'm Prof. Nicolay and head of the Research Institute for Medical University of Plovdiv. I hope I am pronouncing that correctly, Bulgaria. At recent years, my team worked on the physiological effects of SARMs, the modulators of the androgen receptors. Do you have some studies, impressions on the side effects of such kind of substances used as supplements by athletes?
Thanks, Nikolai. How welcome. I haven't seen you for some time. So Nikolai worked in our lab many years ago, probably 20 or more years ago, I think. So it's great to hear that you're doing those important studies. No, you're asking me questions about which I know absolutely nothing. So, maybe you can just tell us what you think. Maybe you can just make a note and tell us what you're finding. I wouldn't know. I know that fooling around with androgens, they probably do have an important effect on performance. And I just often wonder that this whole story about carbs being so important isn't covering up something else. That the athletes have discovered something else that they're doing, and to hide it, they say, "Oh, we're taking lots of carbs," because their performances suddenly go up. One thing I've learned working on Law of Running, the 5th edition, is that the total mass of red blood cells, or what we call the hemoglobin mass, the total hemoglobin mass, is a key predictor of performance. And if you bleed people, so you take away the red blood cells, their performance goes down. And if you give them a little bit more, it goes up. And so that's something that gets missed. So, and of course, erythropoietin works on these, increasing your total hemoglobin mass. And it's very difficult to detect. So if you see people suddenly performing a lot better, I'm just wondering if erythropoietin isn't making a comeback in certain sports where they're not testing quite as well as they should be doing. So, I think manipulation is continuing in athletes. I don't follow it, and I follow the experts who are often a bit cynical. You think they're a bit cynical, because I hate watching the Tour de France and thinking that the best cyclists are doping. But when they tell you that they're producing power outputs which are much greater than they were 5 or 10 years ago, you wonder what's happened. Because it's not likely to be just training. There might be something else involved.
Thank you, Prof, and thank you for that question. Mark is asking, the idea that you should consume a small amount of carbs to prevent low blood sugar for endurance running. Is there any benefits also for everyday life in ketosis?
Mark, that's a great question. So what we found was that if you go low carbs, theoretically, you might be able to exercise for any length of time, up to maybe 4 or 5 hours without requiring carbohydrates. But for most people, we think if you go 2 or 3 hours, you will need a touch of carbohydrate. The advance we've provided is that it doesn't have to be very much. It can only be 10 grams per hour, which is 2 teaspoons of glucose. That's all you need. So it's a tiny amount, but you do need it. And the problem is if you allow your blood glucose to fall, your performance drops off, and then you stop dead. And you feel terrible. And if you just take a little bit of sugar at that point, within 5 minutes, you feel completely recovered, and 10 minutes, you're off again. So, we've written this huge review to confirm that in all the studies where they found an effective carbohydrate, sorry, not all, 88%, the control group, so you've got an intervention group and a control group. The control group, their blood glucose level falls. And 88%. And so the benefit for taking carbohydrate had something to do with maintaining your blood glucose level. And what happened is people never bothered to look at the glucose in detail, because they said, no, but we know it's muscle glycogen. So the muscle glycogen is the problem. And we were the first to say, no, we're the first modern people to say it's the blood glucose concentration. Now, if you adapt very well to the high-fat diet, it may well be that you could go for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours and not requiring glucose. But it's really not worth it, because there's so little glucose that you need. It's not going to affect your health in any way. This week, I came across a publication about 5 years ago in mice, where they had mice who had a problem with regulating their blood glucose. And the other ones had no problem because they'd manipulated some particular protein. And they've got these blood glucose levels going like this. And then these poor mice, poof, the blood glucose dropped, poof, and they fell unconscious. And then they said, it's so clear it's the glucose in the bloodstream. And that's what we see. If you you're a human and your glucose starts falling, you're in trouble. So, and it really is, I think that I was watching the Tour de France, the Tour of Italy yesterday, and they remember that in 2002, some athlete had collapsed on this. He's gone from leading the race to 12th or something in one stage, maybe not leading, but from the top to that's hypoglycemia. That's what, there's nothing else that can stop you completely in your tracks like that. Not muscle glycogen depletion. So that's the problem. If you don't take a little glucose during exercise, you may stop dead. Not dead physically, but you may not be able to continue.
That's what they call hitting the wall, right?
Well, hitting the wall is
it's
a term that's given anytime you stop running or slow down, but that's in the brain. I'm sure it's a brain phenomenon.
Oh.
Yeah, I must tell you. So when we came up with the central governor theory that it's a brain phenomenon and it's biological, in other words, the main driver is coming from the body. And anyone who's run a marathon knows that. You reach a point where you can have the best psychology in your head and you cannot speed up. It's impossible. And that's it. So one of the first people to take us on didn't like it because he was a psychologist and he thought he should be remembered as the person who discovered the brain's importance, you see. So anyway, there's another writer who wrote a book about, it was going to write only about the central governor. But when he met this scientist in Britain and spoke to him, this guy convinced him that I was wrong and he was right. So then the athlete, this guy who's a good runner, said, okay, you train me to run my next marathon. And I'm going to do all the psychological training that you need. And so what that involved was sitting in front of a computer and trying to get your brain to not get tired. So he did all of this, you see. So then the big day comes and he's going to go and run the marathon. And up to 30 Ks, he is storming and everything's going amazingly. And then all of a sudden, the body starts talking to him and saying, you've had it right. And he slows down. And all his techniques from the psychologist had no effect whatsoever because it's the dominant physiology that's going to tell you whether you can continue running or not. And that was it. We haven't heard any more from that guy's theory since.
Oh, that's so interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Prof. Let me see here. Where are we now? Michelle is asking. Hello, Prof. Can a person take too much salt, and what salt is best to take?
Yeah. Thanks, Michelle. Yes, there are some people who are supposedly salt sensitive, and if they take more than about 5 grams a day, they can perhaps get hypertension, and they will benefit by reducing their salt intake. But remember, it's quite a lot of salt. The idea that salt causes hypertension has never been proven. And the end result is actually if you drop your sodium intake, you develop certain adaptations which are detrimental to your health. So the best amount of salt per day is about between 3 to 5 grams. That's perfectly safe. And people seem to live longest between 3 to 5 grams. So yes, you can take too much salt in certain individuals, but the problem with hypertension is insulin resistance. So if you have hypertension, you've got to look after your insulin resistance. That's the treatment for hypertension. It's not reducing your salt intake below, say, 3 grams or 4 grams. Your body is incredibly able to regulate your salt intake. So if I put you on a 12-gram salt intake, tomorrow you will secrete the excess. Let's say you need 3 grams a day, and you suddenly increase to 12 grams, which would be impossible because the food would taste terrible. But that extra 9 grams is going to get excreted in your urine the next day. In 24 hours, you'll be back in sodium balance. And the same applies if you reduce your sodium intake below what you need. Within 24 hours, you'll correct that sodium imbalance. And this was shown by a guy called Con in the Second World War. He had people exercise for 6 hours a day. They were people who didn't want to go and fight, but they were very committed. And they went into the laboratory 6 hours a day in the heat. And he reduced their salt intake from about 5 to 1 gram. He could not induce salt deficiency because the regulatory systems are so powerful.
Wow. Thank you, Prof. And can you recommend, is there specific salt one should take? Table salt, pink salt?
It should have iodine in it. It should be iodinated because iodine deficiency is quite a problem. And the salt needs to come from the sea. That's why people living at high altitude often get thyroid problems because they're not getting enough iodine.
Interesting. Thank you, Prof. Then Saisha saying, hello, Prof and Yana, watching from Manila in the Philippines. Welcome and thanks so much for joining us. Nick is saying, good morning from Georgia, USA. Thank you so much for your work, Prof. Love listening to your wisdom. I'm type 1 for 34 years, carnivore for 5 years. Thanks to you and other LCHF proponents. Came off all meds aside from insulin and lost 62 pounds and keeping it off. God bless.
Thanks, Nick, and well done for your bravery in doing it, because I know you would have done it and people would have told you that you're going to kill yourself and so on. And it's great like people like yourself will come out and speak like this, because every type 1 diabetic, every type 2 diabetic has to know that the advice they're given is killing them. And so we've got to get the advice out. And, I get so frustrated by the medical profession. So they've been focusing the last 6 months in America on measles. There were 4 measles deaths last year, But in this country, South Africa, there are 10,000 new diagnoses of type 2 diabetes every month. 10,000. And those people, all of them are going to die of type 2 diabetes unless they sort it out. And no one addresses it. It's just not allowed to talk about it.
Yeah, Prof. That's such a frustrating topic, and we see it as well with the work that we do with Eat Better South Africa. We are currently running a study at a clinic here in Cape Town, and we are enrolling type 2 diabetics into the Eat Better South Africa program. And it's really just incredible to see, within, I want to say, a week to 2 weeks, within days, blood glucose starts coming down. Within 2 weeks, hypertension starts to increase to the point where you have to adjust the medication.
One of the Kenyan physicians noticed this. He's Kenyan, he's in the low-carb grouping. And he told us that Africans respond better to low-carb diets than Europeans. And he's able to reverse diabetes more quickly than anyone else by just getting African people to eat less carbs. And that's what you're observing, because that wouldn't happen, I suspect, in a white European community. But it's observed all the time in African communities.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
The next question is from Hi, Prof. Noakes, Gavin and Julie Head from Upgrade Health here. What's your view on pro athletes now taking 120 grams or more carbs per hour in races? And based on your research, what are the possible long-term effects?
Thanks, Jules. My view is, which I've developed over time, is that if you're an elite athlete, you have to be profoundly insulin sensitive. Absolutely. Because if you aren't insulin sensitive and eat high carbohydrate diet, let's say you're eating 60%, 70% carbohydrate, you will have visceral fat. And particularly if you've got sugar and fructose in the diet, you will develop visceral fat. And you won't notice that, or people won't notice it. And it just takes 1 kilogram. And that guy who was running a 2:01 marathon is going to be running 2:04, 2:05, 2:06. Taking that extra kilogram, it's extra 2% weight if you're 50 kilograms, is going to slow you down. And no one mentions it. You see, we only see the best athletes, but they never ask, now what happened to the guy who's training with you, eating the same diet, but running slower and not finishing? I'm sure if you went to Kenya and you looked at all the best athletes there's a group who is slightly sub-elite. And they're eating exactly the same diet. They're training pretty much as the other athletes are. What role does their diet have in increasing their fat content? But you can't see because it looks so thin. Now you move to Western culture where we've got so much obesity, and you think that people can get away by eating those high-carb diets. So to answer your question, if you're an elite athlete and you're getting away with 120 grams per hour, it's only because you're profoundly insulin sensitive and you're not getting fat on that diet. But for most of us, taking that amount of carbohydrate, it's going to make us pre-diabetic. In our one study, where we compared we put people on a high-fat diet and a high-carb diet, and then they changed. 30%, 3 out of 10, were pre-diabetic on the high-carb diet, and they were reversed completely on the high-fat diet. And these are guys who are not obese. They're eating what they would think is a reasonably good diet, and they're doing plenty of exercise. But the choice of an ultra-processed food, high-carbohydrate diet was enough to push them into diabetes. There is, I think his name is Lionel Sanders, professional triathlete who's won many races, admitted that he is pre-diabetic, and he's finally got off the sugar kick and reversing his diabetes. So it's going to happen. The problem is it happens when you're 35 or 40, when no one has any interest in you anymore, so they get away with it. I would like to see if these people really are ingesting 120 grams per hour. What's happened now, it's like a badge of honor. You only did 120, I did 150, and you did 150, I did 180. And again, I wonder if they're not hiding something else, because there is no way that amount of carbohydrate will make any beneficial effect. The physiology is absolutely clear. All that happens, and we've shown this in this massive review we've written, all that happens is if you take a high carbohydrate diet, you suppress your fat oxidation. And so if let's say you're getting another 30 kilojoules per minute from carbohydrate, you're reducing your fat by 30 kilojoules per minute. It's just a complete switch. So all you're doing by eating 120 grams carbohydrate every hour, you're converting yourself from a fat-burning animal to a carbohydrate-burning animal. And there's no evidence that you're going to do better on that diet. There's a massive placebo effect. And remember that carbohydrates are addictive, so it's much easier to carry on, eat all these carbs and say, you see, it's making me better, when actually you're just hiding an addiction, which will come out in due course.
Thank you, Prof. The next question is it's a comment from Ian. Good morning. I'm creeping up to 74 years and happily on carnivore. I also practice jiu-jitsu, and my instructor recently asked me about that way of eating, and he is going to give it a try.
Congratulations, Ian. And he's going to feel much more healthy on that diet, as I'm sure you have, as we all do.
And then I see there's another comment from Prof. Nikolai. Thank you very much for your answer, Tim. Again, I'm Prof. Nikolai from Bulgaria. Me and my research team, we would like to contact you by email, WhatsApp, etc. So please give the details. So you are very welcome to email us at info@thenoakesfoundation.org, and we will be able to put you in contact with Prof. Noakes. If there's this is just generally for anyone listening that wants to get in touch with Prof or us as the foundation, just email us at info@thenoakesfoundation.org, but I'll also ask that the media team just puts that details in there for us. Then Elda has got a question here. I'm taking liquid iodine drops. Is it safe? If yes, please advise on which product.
Thanks, Ida. That's a great question. I've never been asked it before, and I do think that you can overdose on iodine. So you have to be very cautious and follow the instructions that you're given. I'm sure that they would not sell a product that you could overdose on too easily. So just carry on as you are, but do follow the instructions very carefully. And I don't know which product to recommend. Maybe someone else can let us know.
Yes, if anyone has any recommendations, just pop it there in the comment section. And then I see Lucy is just sending us a bunch of hearts. So thank you, Lucy. So we're going to head over to some of the other questions we've had, Prof, that came through prior to this live session. But if there's anyone else that still wants to ask Prof a question, just pop it there in the comment section. So going over to this question from Janine. She's asking, as a kombucha brewer, I have been wondering if there has been any local assessments performed on kombucha brewed in South Africa. I'm specifically interested in the effects which kombucha may have on the body in relation to low-carb, ketogenic, and carnivore diets? Also, would kombucha regulate or spike glucose levels?
Sure. You're asking again a question I can't really answer, as I haven't seen the literature. There may well be some literature on that question. But as you know, the problem in medicine is that we don't look at the naturopathic medicines and interventions. We just look at what the pharmaceutical industry provides, and I'm tired of that. And so I'm very much in promoting natural ways of doing things. And it's difficult because there are few studies, or if there are studies, we're not really aware of them, or they're not promoted to us. So I think you should keep working on it and see how it goes. And the microbiome is terribly important, and what gives us the best microbiome has still got to be determined, I think.
Thank you, Prof, and thank you, Janine, for that question. The next question is from Brenton. I'm currently on day 2 of the LCHF diet, and I'd like to find out what staples are recommended for my kitchen cupboards. I understand that store-bought tomato sauce, mayonnaise, and chutney are usually not suitable for this diet. Could you please advise me on what items I should be stocking up on?
Yeah, thanks very much. I think the easy answer, and it's not advertising, it was a book we wrote, Real Meal Revolution. Although it's already 10 or more years old, it's had green lists and orange lists and red lists. And the red list will explain to you why you shouldn't eat those foods that you've mentioned, because they all have lots of sugar in it. That's the hidden thing. And if you want to get your carbohydrate intake low, you can't afford to eat any of those sugary substances. So if I could ask you to look at the Real Meal Revolution and see the green list, and those are the foods that we promote.
Thank you, Prof, and thank you for that question. We also have those lists available for download on our website. So I'll just ask the media team just to pop that also into the comment box. I feel like after today's chat, everyone's going to have to go scroll back to find all those links. But yes, we can share those food lists with you as well. I see Louise is saying, in terms of the iodine recommendations, she's saying Lugel's iodine. And then Michelle is asking, is carnivore, now I lost the question, is carnivore recommended for menopause rather than hormone replacement therapy?
Michelle, I have to be very cautious about giving medical advice, because that's what I went to court for a long time. And so this is not medical advice. This is a personal opinion. And I'm not sure that HRT has proven to be as effective as people think, as the pharmaceutical industry wants us to believe. And again, this is a philosophy. It's not necessarily hard science. But my philosophy is menopause is there for a reason, and you just need to go through it and cope with it. I worry about what affects manipulating your hormone levels after the menopause, whether that's a good idea or not. And maybe there is science showing it is good for you, but I don't know. I'm just saying, like, should men take testosterone once you go through our menopause? And I would never advise it, because you don't know what the long-term effects are. So, however, the carnivore diet can be recommended at any age, because it's the best diet.
Thank you, Prof, and thank you, Michelle, for that very, very interesting question. Wendy is saying, a wonderful and informative session as always. I always learn something new. Thank you so much, Prof and Diana.
Thanks, Wendy.
And then Haley's got a question. What is Prof's thoughts on taking creatine combined with following a keto diet for someone who exercises daily training for triathlon?
Yeah, Haley, thanks a lot. I was always a bit concerned about protein and creatine. So in fact, I can remember when creatine first came out in South Africa, it was about 1994, 1995. And we just started the Sports Science Institute. I can remember that one of the great South African rugby players was promoting the creatine. So we had to have a conference on it. And I can remember taking some biltong, which is dried meat or cured meat, in South Africa. It's a very much a staple food. And I pulled up and I said, "Yeah, I've got the best creatine you'll ever eat." And I pulled out the stick of biltong. And that's kind of what I thought. Well, I was wrong, because there's now a lot of good evidence coming out that creatine has widespread effects, including on the brain. And that taking 5 grams a day is probably very good for you. So we finally got the evidence that creatine is very helpful. And there's clear evidence, when we went on the high-carb diet, the thing we did cut was not only fat, it was also protein. And when we replaced that with a high-fat diet, we still weren't correcting the protein intake. And protein is, as I said, it's a difficult thing to get other than adding it in a form like creatine. So the evidence is clear, creatine is healthy, it's good for you, and you should take up to maybe 5 grams a day. That will help you.
Thank you, Prof. And thank you for that question, Ali. I think I've got chance for one more. So I'm going to look here at one that we had from before. It's from Brenton. Good day. My daughter is having a few health issues. Her sugar was 4 and her insulin level was 10 on a fasting blood test. So I was wondering if this is something we should be worried about and if we should be looking at the LCHF diet.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. I think the key in always medicine is to ask, why did you go to the doctor? Why did your daughter need to go to the doctor? And what are the symptoms, and what was likely the diagnosis that the doctor was looking for? So an insulin of 10 is quite normal. It's a little higher than you want, but on a high carb diet, that's a pretty good value. We really like to see it below 6. And if glucose is 4, which is perfect, that's certainly not anything you worry about. Unfortunately, I think fortunately, I don't see any problem there. But you might want to keep checking her fasting glucose and the insulin. You don't say how old she is, and we don't have any other information. But on those 2 measurements, 10 insulin and glucose 4, you would say she's pretty healthy, pretty normal. And therefore, whatever the problem is, it's unlikely, it's not diabetes, that's for sure, and it's not likely pre-diabetes. And it doesn't look like it's insulin resistance either, so it's something else. So my advice would be, I think a low-carb diet is excellent, and the fact is you're there for a reason. You believe that a low-carb diet might be healthy. I promise you, she's never going to be unhappy if you put on a low-carb diet, because she's going to be thinner and healthier than all the young women that she's involved with. So, and she won't have a sugar addiction. And those are big things in society today. So you're going to do the right thing if you put her on a low-carb diet.
Thank you, Prof. And thank you so much for that question. Prof, there's one more. Are you ready for it?
Yes.
That's a word I might not be able to pronounce. You might know how to say it. But Angie is asking, what do you think of what are your thoughts in taking galacto
oligosaccharides?
Yes, from bovine beef as a supplement for gut health.
Yeah, so, I'd have to see what the logic is at. So galacto oligosaccharides are, I know what it is. It means there must be galactose with all sorts of stuck together. That's an oligosaccharide. Galactose is the sugar, one of the sugars in milk, as I think. I hope I'm right. But galactose is, so what they've done is they've taken out instead of using glucose, they've used, so normally if you stick lots of glucose molecules together, you've got maltodextrin. And that's the main source of glucose that athletes use, and the main source in our diet, because maltodextrin is also like starch. It's very similar structure. So instead of having glucose as the repeating molecule, they've got galactose. It's still a sugar. It's still a carbohydrate. What that might do in the gut, I've absolutely no idea. So I'd have to see what evidence have they that taking this carbohydrate rather than cellulose is producing a particular microbiome that might be beneficial.
Yeah. Thank you, Angie. That's a very interesting question. I'll hop onto Google afterwards to go learn more about this. I see, Clement, you are asking if Prof would come and do an interview on your podcast. Please, you are welcome to email us again at info@thenoakesfoundation.org. They're also saying they did the sports nutrition training with the Nutrition Network and it was great. Joanne is saying, thank you, Prof. Kieran saying, what an enjoyable hour. Thanks, Prof. Vinyana. Replenishment for the soul. Oh, that's such a beautiful way of saying it. Angie saying, thank you. And Alda saying, thank you for your time. So thank you, everyone that was here again with us today. It was lovely having you. Such interesting questions as always. I think it was Wendy that said she always learns something new. I agree, me too. So thank you so much for all your questions. And obviously, Prof, as always, thank you so much for giving us your time and answering all of the questions. And then just a reminder, the Nutrition Network's Addiction Bundle launched yesterday. And I know Prof also mentioned sugar addiction, food addiction earlier. So if you want to learn more about that, hop on over to their website or their Facebook page. And then again, a reminder of the World Nutrition Summit. Make sure you get your tickets. There's limited tickets available and we would love to have you join us. Wherever you are, have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, and we would love to see you again next month.
Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye. Thanks again. Lovely questions. That's really, as you can tell, I've really enjoyed it. And Joanna, we both really enjoyed it. And it wouldn't be as enjoyable if we didn't have your fantastic questions. So we really appreciate your presence today.
Definitely. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.